Paischin b'chveira achsanya. I'd like to give a special hakaras hatov to Agudas Yisrael. My name is Yechiel Kalish. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I'm currently a state representative for the 16th district, and it is a kavod for me to be here, to be yaitze the words of Rav Yossi ben Yoyezer, v'hevi shoyse b'tzama es devreihem. We have the opportunity to sit today with the Rosh Yeshiva from Ner Yisrael, Aaron Feldman, and the Rosh Yeshiva and the Rav from Flatbush, Yisrael Reisman. We're going to discuss Askanus and government relations. I'd like to thank very much Rav Chaim David Zwiebel, Rav Leibish Becker, Rav Shai Sher, and of course my Tayri Yedid, Rav Adi Matzin, for helping to make this session a possibility. Rosh Yeshiva, Rebbe, I'm going to ask questions on 4 different categories. I'm going to discuss current events. I'm going to ask questions relates to Eretz Yisrael, Askanus, and Askanim. I don't know if the Rosh Yeshiva wants to give some divrei psicha before we begin, or if the Rav wants to give some divrei psicha, but maybe a few minutes on the topic in general before we ask some specific questions.
וכל העסקים בצורכי ציבור, הקדוש ברוך הוא, what does it say?
Yishalim Scharim.
What does it say?
Yishalim Scharim.
Yishalim Scharim, Yosem and Kol Machlo, Yiblach Ol Gufam, Yislach Ol Avoinam. העסקים בצורכי ציבור באמונה. There's a special schus in being oisik in tzorchet tzibur be'emunah. That means without any expectation of compensation or gain or interest. Oisik b'tzorchet tzibur be'emunah. Why is that necessary for oisik b'tzorchet tzibur? Because you need the schus of the rabbim to help you, to give you siyata d'shmaya. Oisik b'tzorchet tzibur has to make decisions which affect everyone, affect the klal. And the only way that he can have siyata d'shmaya to make the right decisions is by not having any self-interest, by throwing himself completely into the work that he's supposed to do, into the mission that he was sent to accomplish. And that's the only way that he'll have Sheshem Shemayim, what it says at the end of the tefillah, Sheschus avoisam es hayosam. The schus of their ancestors helps them. In order to be zeiche, to tap into the schus of their ancestors, they have to do things l'shem shemayim. So that is the introduction of being an askin b'Yisrael, doing things l'shem shemayim. Someone who does things for personal interest is posel, and he pasels his avodah. So we're trying to find out how can a oisik b'tzorchet tzibur do things l'shem shemayim al pi Torah, al pi yirah shemayim, and to avoid any interest besides what's emes, what's proper. And the Eibusher should give us siyata d'shmaya to be able to answer the correct question, the correct answers.
Rebbe?
I say amen to what Rosh Yeshiva said.
Very good. So I'm going to start off with a question for the Rav. The last 8-9 months have been a very difficult time, not just within Klal Yisrael, but in society in general. And there's no question that individuals within our Kehillah have started talking about moving to Eretz Yisrael in large numbers. In fact, Nefesh B'Nefesh said that they estimate 250,000 Anglos will immigrate from the United States or from the diaspora to Eretz Yisrael in response to the corona crisis. Has the Rav been approached by families in the Kehillah? What has been the general response as it relates to moving from America to Eretz Yisrael, at this time?
Just Rosh Hashiva, every individual has to make his personal calculation. The person has to live where he and his family could serve the Rebbeinu Shalom the best. To say that because of upheaval, suddenly everybody could serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu better in Eretz Yisrael is not likely to be true. Certainly, people who have children and grandchildren look to their grandparents as an anchor of frumkeit and ehrlichkeit, have responsibilities to their families. So while there is an overall general mood that the Medina Shel Chesed here is not what it once was, and the inner feeling of every Yid to want to go to Eretz Yisrael is certainly reawakened, every person has to make his own calculation. Probably about 20 years ago, the Rosh Hashiva, when he was in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Feldman spoke to Americans who had moved to Eretz Yisrael. Now, I can't speak for the Rosh Hashiva. As best I recall, he explained that moving with young children to Eretz Yisrael, or even teenage children, is a dangerous thing to do. Parents are responsible for the chinuch of their children. And the knee-jerk reaction and the automatic comparisons to Germany of the 30s is, well, we hope unwarranted, but certainly it's not the cheshbon hanefesh of every individual. Each individual has to make a cheshbon as to the way he could best serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What the Yeshiva pointed out at that time was that for children of certain ages, and certainly it would seem to be anywhere from 4th to 12th grade, the transfer to Eretz Yisrael is a very dangerous one. No child wants to be an immigrant. The person wants to know to where he belongs. And therefore, to make a general statement is very dangerous. To say that people with young children should move en masse is not so realistic. I don't think it's wise. To say that many people who are considering moving anyway will now use this as the impetus to go through with their plans, that's going to happen. And there are many in our communities who considered going to Eretz Yisrael and have been considering it, and this is going to push them to do it. Whether 250,000 people will go or will not go, most of these predictions are done in the heat of the moment, and usually they wane with time. But beware, public statements are just that, the public statements. Everybody, every Frum Yid has to make a cheshbon hanefesh as to where he can serve the Rebbeinu Shalom best, where his children can serve the Rebbeinu Shalom best, where they can grow up best. And it's a very important nekuda to take into account when you hear very idealistic, beautiful drushes that are all kulay emes about our need to be in Eretz Yisrael, and they're given by very good people, myself included, but each person has to make his own cheshbon.
Shkech, thank you, Rav. The Rosh Hashiva, this session is taking place virtually Motzei Shabbos after the keynote session where the Rosh Hashiva has just spoken. And one of the topics that many people are questioning is the World Zionist Organization, issue that came up over the past year. It seems like there were Gedolei Torah on both sides of this issue, whether or not the Olam HaTorah should participate in such an effort. That's not my question. My question is, what is our Mesorah as it relates to Medinas Yisrael and Zionism in particular, just so we have, those of us who didn't grow up, right, when all of this was happening, and it's starting to, I guess, lessen the impact of what happened 60, 70 years ago. If the Rosh Hashiva could be melamed us, what is the proper hashkafa on this issue?
Well, I think that you didn't listen virtually to what I had to say, because I did discuss this in my speech. Did you listen to
Not
this?
yet virtually.
Yeah. So I talked what our hashkafa is about Zionism and what our hashkafa is about the state of Israel. Generally, I'll put it concisely, the state of Israel exists, nothing we're going to fight with, and the welfare and security of a few million Jews depends on the state of Israel. So we're going to do our best to protect the security of Israel and worry about the welfare of any Jew that lives there. But the philosophy, the underpinnings of the state of Israel from their very inception, are not al pi Torah, they're not Jewish. They're taken from a movement which began by Theodor Herzl, who himself didn't circumcise his children and had a Christmas tree in his house. An assimilated Jew who looked at Judaism as a burden. Judaism is something to be ashamed of and something to get rid of. The differences between a Jew and a Goy bothered him very much. And he looked to make a state where Jews could be Goyim. When I came over the first time to Israel, there was a jazz musician sitting next to me on the airplane, and he said to me as we were circling to land, he said, "I'm so happy to be in Israel." He says, "In Israel I can forget that I'm a Jew." That's what he said. He came to Israel in order to forget that he's a Jew, because Judaism meant to him anti-Semitism, being discriminated against. In Israel, he could forget about being a Jew. Because this person, unfortunately, didn't know what Torah is, didn't know what Yiddishkeit is, didn't know what coming close to Ribono Shel Olam is. So Israel was a place to forget to be a Jew. And that's what Zionism was, a place to forget that you're a Jew. And because of that, the underpinnings of Israel are secular. The name of God was not mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. It was a mention obliquely with a compromise, Sur Yisrael. And since then, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. It's just that there's a large percentage of Sephardi Jews that remain religious, which has an impact on the government. Ashkenazi to a certain extent. And because of that, the government, the philosophy of the government is secular and not al pi Torah. How could a Jew live not al pi Torah? I spoke about this in my virtual speech before. So the shita of Gedolei Torah has always been that we cannot support the philosophy of Israel. Now, the state of Israel, as a place, a haven for Jews, where people live, we have to do our best to make sure that they're successful. So this is generally what I speak. In the virtual thing, you'll hear more details.
Very good. Thank you, Shiva. And this, I guess this is a good follow-up to that question, and I'd really like to hear from Rosh Shiva and then from the Rav, from Rebbe if possible, because certain political figures, I guess throughout history, and President Trump is certainly today's example, have the ability to connect with certain groups of supporters in a very deep and emotional way. As from Jews, or even as a community, is this connection healthy? Should we look to these figures as role models? And really, in some families and some shuls, support for President Trump in this past election or not has led to a breakdown in familial relations. What's going on? Is this healthy? And how does, it seems like our support for him is based on his support for Eretz Yisrael, as well as the other side's lack of support for Torah values.
Yeah. I don't think a Jew should ever take a secular figure as a role model. He doesn't have the basic beliefs that a Jew should have. And how can we follow him? How can we take him as our role model? In other words, to split that he's a role model for one thing and not for another thing is not a is not a healthy thing for a Jew. We have our own way of life, we have our values, and we cannot take another person as a role model who doesn't share our values. That's all. Now, you could believe that he's a good leader, or you could believe that his opinions are valid and they should be followed, but to take him as someone that I should adulate and someone that I consider a hero and something I like my children to grow up to be when they grow up. That's not a way for a Jewish family to raise children or to run their home. Whether or not Trump is a good president, not a good president, like you say, it's a question of taste. Some people consider him acting impulsively, and some people think that he's very forceful and carries out what he promises and doesn't care about social niceties. They admire him for that. That's a question of personal taste. How much he's accomplished for Israel, okay, that's very, very, very praiseworthy, what he's accomplished. But there are other things, other considerations also. He has also caused a breakdown of a common language in America. The divide of America is due to a great extent because of his aggressiveness and unwillingness to compromise and to deal with people. And because of that, one could argue that the gain that we have for Israel is offset by the breakdown in the society in America, which he has caused to a great extent. So it's a question you could choose either side you want. I think the matter is it's a lame duck issue because it doesn't look like he's going to win these court cases where the election was a fraud. I doubt if he'll win, and he's not the president anymore. So it's just, the whole question is a lame duck question. But since you ask what our role model should be, I'm telling you that he certainly should not be our role model. No.
Rebbe, as it relates to has Rebbe seen families, as getting? I've seen it in our Kehillah in Chicago, and I'm wondering if.
As you know, in Brooklyn, we're more normal. I think in the Megillah, the word Melech refers to the Borei Olam. I believe it's Rabbi Isaac Sher who asks that why should a reference to a Rasha like Achashverosh be a reference to God, to the Rabbeinu Shalom? Melech, referring to Achashverosh, is a reference to the Rabbeinu Shalom. And Rabbi Isaac Sher writes, and Mechtam Eliyahu has a longer mimer on this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and he uses leaders to guide the world to its destiny, to guide the world as it affects Klal Yisrael as things go on. So Melech is the Rabbeinu Shalom. When you look at the Melech, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu guiding. There's no question we have a Karas HaTov to somebody who's helped the state of Israel and helped basically political causes that are in line with our thinking. But Yid sees the ongoing of the world, certainly the politics of the world, the Leiv Melech, the Leiv Sarim. It's the Mechtam Eliyahu says that a Sar or a Melech doesn't have the same Bechira as everybody else, that it's a different level of Bechira, and that when we see things happen, we see what's happening, the Melech, the leader, as a tool of Rabbeinu Shalom guiding the world to a certain destiny. And in the case of the politics of our country, which will continue without a doubt to be very in great upheaval, and the divide in the country is extraordinary, it's beyond me to think that there should be families that break up over political disagreements. It's not HaKadosh Baruch Hu is guiding the world in a certain direction. We daven for it to be as good as we could be, and we try to do our hishtadlus to do. But like Reb Chaim Brisker said, when the Shtadlus ends, the B'tachim begins. Where the Shtadlus ends, the B'tachim begins. At the end of the day, the Rebbe Hashem has led us through a certain period in which there was a certain respite for the state of Israel politically, and for a lot of the things that we hold dear. And Kosh Baruch Hu is bringing us to more challenging times, and the Lev Sarim of the new Sarim will also be out of Kosh Baruch Hu. We hope, we daven for it to continue to be in a way that's favorable to us.
So along those lines, and this is for the Rub, since Brooklyn is more normal, and those of us who don't live in Brooklyn, the mask requirement, right, is something that when you walk into a minyan in Chicago, right, everyone's wearing a mask. Right? I davened in a certain shul today in Borough Park. I was the one wearing a mask together with one other individual. Is that a breakdown in government trust? In other words, is there a lack of trust in the government here in what they're hearing, or is there something deeper that those of us out of town don't understand?
We could really have a session on the topic, which I don't want to do. First, I will just say for the record that in our shul in the Agudah of Madison, where we are, we complied with the law. All minyanim have always had masks. There was never a time everybody wore masks for all minyanim, and we had 100% compliance because it was never questioned. It was done with a certain certainty. The law in New York State is that for individual study, you don't need masks. And therefore, when people learn individually, we don't require masks. We follow what the law requires, and that's what we happen to be doing. Now, putting that aside, there are very strong feelings on anything to do with COVID. Anybody who talks about it generally has his mind made up. In the yeshiva, I told the people involved that when a parent calls, don't start debating the topics. If a parent is calling to ask a question of instruction, answer. If they're calling to debate whether the policy is a good policy or not, just don't get into it, because people have strongly held opinions. What I'm begging my audience today is to understand, just like in America, there are politicians who think that anyone who supported Trump is a lunatic. They ignore the fact that nearly 70 million people voted for him. Right. And the other way also. It became a world where if someone disagrees with you, they're lunatics. There are groups in Klal Yisrael behaving one way, there are groups behaving the other way. It's a very complex issue. The issue of mask, compliance with masks, with the requirements to wear masks, it's really a very complex issue and depends on many factors. Now, while I have my own opinion, and I'm certain that I'm right, there has to be a realization that there is more than one way to look at it. And the idea of someone being so opinionated so as to consider everyone on the other side to be ridiculous, to be obscene, it's just not right. And the idea that pikuach nefesh iberalts is not totally true. The Shulchan Aruch has rules for what constitutes pikuach nefesh and what doesn't. There are halachas that define pikuach nefesh. And while each community should follow its Rav, the Rabbanim are following the medical advice they get, to talk harshly about those that disagree, what's going on, it's first of all absurd, totally absurd. It's just not correct from a factual standpoint. And that's not the way. Klal Yisrael doesn't work that way. When you have different opinions in Klal Yisrael, there's a naharu pashte, certain respect. Doesn't mean I have to go there, doesn't mean I have to do it, but there's a certain respect for the fact it's not an individual doing it, it's a group doing it. There are rabbanim involved. You may disagree with them, but to totally obliterate their opinion and talk harshly about it, it's both not smart and it's wrong. Al pi hashkafas terasena.
Shiva wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, I agree with Rabbi Reisman that we have to be melamed l'kaf zchus and think that those people that don't care or don't take the mask obligation as seriously as others have a reason for it. There is one reason is there's a cynicism that the government is not reliable. They're not consistent. For example, last week there was a meeting in Torah Masura as to how schools should react to the proposed closing of Chadorim schools by the mayor. So in the middle of the meeting, someone called up from the mayor's office and said, "This is so-and-so calling from the mayor's office." It was one of his assistants. And he said, the mayor said that he's not closing private schools. So there was no reason. The meeting was adjourned. Why? Because the only reason why he said that if there's over 3%, he's closing the private schools is because the union, the teachers' union, demanded that from him. And he promised the teachers' union that over 3% he would close all schools. But he's not doing it for private schools. And the governor said that you have to have over 8% in order to close schools. So there's a little bit of a lack of trust. If the mayor decided something because the teachers' union wants to have a day off, they said that over 3% you have to close schools. There's a cynicism that you can't really trust the government. Now, the question is, like Rabbi Eisman said, who says 3% has a din of pikuach nefesh? And not only that, essentials are not included in this ban of social distancing and closing stores. Now, the question is, what's called an essential? Is a grocery store an essential? Yes. But is a cheder, is a school essential? To a lot of people, that could be considered essential, because not to teach Torah to children. Teachers tell me that after the break in schools last spring and summer, children forgot how to read. Their reading was deficient after they came back. In other words, it has a serious effect on the future of Klal Yisrael, this. So they consider it essential. And in essentials, you can be makel. You don't have to have the social distancing. This is what they think. Now, of course, there's different opinions, and I would say the general rule would be to follow medical advice. But I can understand those people that are cynical, and those people consider this essential, and therefore do not take the demands of the government seriously. This spills over. Once you don't take one request seriously, it spills over into other requests, even though it's not logical to disobey many of other distancing regulations and so forth. So I'm saying we have to ask the people, why are they doing what they're doing? I've never seen a newspaper reporter interview someone from the communities that are not makbid on distancing and masking. Why don't they care? They just assume, like Rabbi Reisman said, assume they're lunatics. So that's terrible. We have to take into consideration other people's opinion also. And they have to ask them why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. This was very helpful for me, and I think for many of the people watching to hear this perspective. I had the opportunity on behalf of Agudas Yisrael many times to travel to Eretz Yisrael and to ask shilas from Gedolei Torah on behalf of Agudas Yisrael. During the time of Rabbi Yoshev Zechron Levracha, I had the opportunity to go in and ask him a shilas. And one of the shilas that I asked Rabbi Yoshev was virtually this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayishlach. It says, Dair and Tefillah and Melchama. Right? Yaakov Avinu sent Dair and Tefillah and Melchama. Do all three exist today, I asked Rabbi Yoshev. And can we employ Melchama, right, in today's world? Rabbi Yoshev looked at me and he said, Marbe bepius. those were his exact words. Marbe bepius. This was mamish the end of. I think he went to the hospital very shortly after and didn't come out. So this was really close to the end of his life. But he only answered marbe bepius. And even before Corona, we had issues where the Torah community had to stand up to the government. We had the issue of same-gender marriage. We had the issue of mitzitza b'peh. The religious discrimination against our schools and our way of life has only increased in the past number of years. And I imagine with this administration, it will get worse. It will get more difficult. It will get more challenging, as Rabbi Reisman alluded to earlier. So first, Rabbi Reisman, you've been very involved in this court case, with Agudas Yisrael. But given this, I don't know what Rabbi Yasha was trying to say to me, but from current times, how do we employ, this shtadlanus, this question?
We have a Kabbalah from the Manhigim in America from the previous Dar, that when it comes to inyanim that have to do with ruchnius, that have to do with frumkeit, and certainly have to do with chinuch habanim, that we stand up and we speak loudly when necessary. When it comes to physical things, it's a different story. To my recollection, there have been three major court cases. And when you say mulchama, I don't know if Rabbi Yoshev understood you to mean litigation or public protests. Public protests are not useful in this country. For some reason, Eretz Yisrael, the Afganot seem to bear fruit, maybe because of the intense l'shem shemayim of people involved. Here, Jews are not, Torah Jews are not involved in public protests. We've done litigation over the last brief period of time regarding mitzitza b'peh, where we were successful in court, regarding the equivalency demand, where again, we were successful at least not in throwing out the whole issue, but in throwing out the regulations that had been issued. And today again, we're in court. At this moment, the Supreme Court is reviewing an injunction for an emergency, an appeal for an emergency injunction, but the court case likely will continue. The idea of pius is first and foremost. In all three cases, it involved ruchnius. In these last two, in the equivalency case and in the case of the House of Worship rules in New York State, we did not go to court until others went first. In other words, despite the fact that the governor's rules for House of Worship in red and orange zones are just not possible from Yidden, nevertheless, we waited until the Archdiocese filed first and Dafka filed second, so that we were following. The same thing when the appeal went to the Supreme Court. The Archdiocese filed on a Thursday, and we filed on the following Monday. In the case of the equivalency, we did the same thing. We waited until the Association of Independent Schools filed their case first, and we followed second. So that was sensitive to the need of pius. However, in the United States, there are three branches of government. And just like if a president proposes a law, nobody would say going to the legislature and trying to convince senators to vote against it is milchama. It is, in a sense, political milchama. Or if a law is passed and we try to influence the president to veto it, no one would say it's milchama. There's a legislative branch of government. And it's true. Politicians take it very personally when they lose in court. Nevertheless, I don't think it's the same type of milchama as street protests. It's legitimate. It has to be done b'kovid reish. We felt in all these cases that it was something crucial to the ruchnius of Klal Yisrael. And I might add, in all three cases, we knew perfectly well that there were large groups in Klal Yisrael that were not going to follow the law, whatever it was, regarding mitzitza b'peh, equivalency, and the same thing today. And therefore, it's really a question A, of whether this constitutes milchama, and Pius is certainly tried first, and B, whether it's in any event the worst of two evils, where we're going to have people publicly going against the governor, and the public shows of what certainly can't constitute Kiddush Hashem. It's certainly better to appeal to the courts with a logical, legitimate case. And as we did, we followed those Umas Ha'olam who had the same interests and followed them into court. So it's with a sensitivity. We're not balabatim here. We're strangers in this country. Sometimes we don't feel that way. We're strangers. We're guests. We certainly belong in Eretz Yisrael. And even a guest has certain rights in the United States.
Yeah. No.
The state Mishnah in Kemach and Torah, which I believe most Balabatim are very familiar. I think they're less familiar with the next words of the Mishnah, in Torah and Kemach. And certainly the opinion of the Bar Tanura, who tells us on that Mishnah, why have money if you have no time to learn, right? Why have money if you have no Torah? So Askanim, right, spend a lot of time in their Askanus. I'm not talking about the professionals who certainly have a requirement. The Rosh Yeshiva Zechron Levrach Avraham Chaim used to tell us, you have to be a mensch, and to be a mensch, it means you have to learn Torah. But Balabatim who want to be in, Talmidim of the yeshiva, or who are going out into the world, and how is the Rosh Yeshiva madrich them as it goes to their learning, as it goes to their Askanus? I'm just wondering what gedorim or what eitzes the Rosh Yeshiva has for these Talmidim.
It's it's a question which depends on the individual case. If someone has a case before him where he has to be oisik b'tzorchei tzibur, because he could save the tzibur from a tzorah, from a difficult situation, certainly he has no heter to learn Torah like anyone else. You have to be vatal Talmud Torah for a mitzvah. If he can help the tzibur, he has no heter to sit and learn. But you're talking about in general. How should he organize his day? How much time should he spend for tzorchei tzibur, and how much time for this? Is he getting money for his tzorchei tzibur? Then it's his parnosa. He has to work as he would work at a regular job, as much as he would work at a regular job. He has no case before him. He's obligated to put in a full day's work. If he's not getting money, he's donating his time, then I would say that he's not mechuyev to give more than 1/10 of his time to tzorchei tzibur. We find in Rishonim and Achronim that just like there's meiser of money, there's meiser also of time when it comes to helping others. I believe Reb Shimon Shkop in his Akdom the Shara Yosha says that you have to give up to a meiser of your time. So if it's not something which is a burning issue for the tzibur that no one else can do, then you have to give up 1/10 of your time to help the tzibur. So if you're a professional, you have to work at it full time. Whatever a person would do at a job. Sometimes a guy who has a job works overtime because it's a necessary thing. You'd have to work overtime. But you'd have to treat it like a regular job. If you're not a professional, then I think the rule would be 10%. 10% of your time. You don't have to give more than 10% of your time for tzorchei tzibur.
So the Rav has a unique position, taking Talmidim from the time that they're younger, or Bachurim, the Kailul, and then the Rav is the Shul. So from the yeshiva to the Shul, there's so many wonderful organizations in Klal Yisrael for people who have a trukah to get involved, to choose from, right? Agudas Yisrael, Achsania, you have Hatzalah, you have Misaskim, you have Shoimim, you have all these wonderful organizations. You've got the Shul itself, right, to get involved in in the shul. When Bachrim or young alike come to the Rav to ask, how does Rosh Yeshiva, help them, decide whether or not it's better to spend more time learning, more time with the family, and how to balance, I guess, your work, avodas haklal, and learning, avodas Hashem life.
The Rosh Yeshiva said it's a very individualized shaila, and obviously it is. Somebody who has the hasmada and the koiches hanefesh to sit and learn b'hasmada, whether he's in kailul or he's a working person who could put in many hours, should allow others to be oisik b'tzarchei tzibur. Sometimes they come to yeshiva, they say, no, there's lavaya, they need 10 people. I tell them, do me a favor, go to a pizza store and get 10 people. Don't pull out the boys who are sitting and learning to be oisik in mitzvahs. You go get somebody else. It's not when it's Afshei Yedei Acherim, you do it Yedei Acherim. And I think that's the klal gadol. Somebody who HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed with a tenuas hanefesh, and I should say he worked on himself to have a tenuas hanefesh, to sit and learn about Smada. He should certainly not give up the quality of Zman. The quality of Zman. Shulchan Aruch Harav says that even though Mevatlan Talmud Torah, for mitzvahs, that's the quantity of time, but not the quality of time. Now, how you define that? Not the quality of time. A person who's a masmid and loses asmada, unless it's Yavshei Yedei Acherim.
So when we went to Eretz Yisrael to ask a shaila, and we got a funny response. We were starting the Young Leadership Division of Agudas Yisrael, and we wanted to encourage younger balabatim to be involved in the organization. And we went to Reb Chaim, Shlitodas Torah, and we asked Reb Chaim, we asked for a bracha for the endeavor. And Reb Chaim looked up at us, and he says, Lech el ziknei amcha. And we didn't get a bracha for the effort. I guess I'm asking the Rosh Yeshiva. I know the Rosh Yeshiva wasn't there, but maybe the Rosh Yeshiva can opine for us. What did Reb Chaim mean? In that response.
It's hard for me to go into Reb Chaim's mind, but what I think that he meant was that this is something that you have to determine in your community whether the loss is greater than the gain or vice versa, and you have to ask the manhigim of your community whether or not this should be done or not. That's all.
So the Rosh Yeshiva is saying, in other words, to go to the manhigim of your community
and find out.
Right now, at least as it relates to representation in government in New York, right? So we have, I believe there's 4 from elected officials on a state and a city level. I think there are 2 from city councilmen and 2 from state elected officials, Simcha Eichenstein, Simcha Felder, and then Chaim Deitch, I think, is ending his time, but there's probably someone from is going to be replacing him, maybe. No. And then who am I missing on the city level?
Kalman Yeager.
Kalman Yeager, right? If one of the mispalim came to the Rav and said, "I want to run for office," right? And he has is this something a frum Jew, right? Obviously, I'm in office, but is this something to be encouraged? Again, given the challenges that we have today, from society, is this something that the Rav would encourage? Is it better to have someone on the inside and put that person themselves through a difficult, assignment?
Again, it's individualized. Let me tell you a Mishnah Berurah. In Hilchas Tefillin in Siman Lamed Ches, I think Sif Ches, the Shulchan Aruch says that somebody who writes or sells tefillin is an Isaac b'mitzvah. And theoretically, if somebody were to come at the end of a day and need tefillin, he would skip davening mincha because he's Isaac b'mitzvah, part of a mitzvah. It seems even miss Kriya Shema to let somebody else have tefillin. That's what it says in Shulchan Aruch. On that, the Mishnah Berurah says, that's dafka if he's a meicher or kaisiv tefillin because he wants to make tefillin available to Klal Yisrael. If he's doing it listaker, he needs a parnasa. He looked around. He tried to go into the clothing business. He tried to go into the food business. And he found a need for a svarim store, for tefillin mezuzah place. So Mishnah Berurah says, la halacha, he says, such a person is not a mitzvah. A pellet of a pellet. You have two svarim stores, a few blocks from each other, and one store owner is busy a whole day, is a Isaac b'mitzvah, and the other store is doing the same thing. He's also selling tefillin and mezuzahs. He's an Isaac b'parnasa. For somebody to go into politics and have the danger of a high-profile position and come into shilas all the time, plus a parnasa. If somebody really asks me, should I go into a parnasa who will have shilas all the time? I say, stay away. Go to a parnasa that's safe. If somebody makes a cheshbon, he talks to his rebbeim, and he wants to go into it because he wants to be an Isaac b'tzarchei tzibur, because he wants to be an Isaac b'mitzvah, such a person. So you have two people. One is going into it for parnasa, and why do you go into parnasa with all kinds of shilas? And the other one is putting on the mantle of being an Isaac b'tzarchei tzibur, being involved in needs. And of course, anytime you Isaac b'tzarchei tzibur, there are kama shilas. So I think this should be the guiding principle of anybody who comes over to a rebbe, to a manik. He says, I want to run for city office. Why do you want to run for city office? We'll have a lot of shilas. If he wants to have siyata d'shmaya, he has to do it because he's an Isaac b'tzarchei tzibur. I don't see any other way a person could hope to have the siyata d'shmaya. This is my feeling as a guiding principle. Each person, of course, has his own individual shilas.
Rashiva,
Yeah.
I asked when we were preparing for the session, I asked the Rashiva regarding social media. I spoke to the Rashiva about social media and the shaila of lifnei iver, so ki'ilu, meaning that when well-meaning individuals or well-meaning organizations post something on social media, given especially Agudas Yisrael and some of the positions that Agudas Yisrael takes, once they post something on social media, whether or not it's milk is white, they will have kama v'kama comments on that social media that lashon hara and worse. Is social media a medium that organizations and individuals should be using, or given the reality that it's here, we just have to be careful. I guess it used to be the shaila whether or not we can have an internet web page, but it seems like that we're moving towards that direction. Now the question is social media. Yeah, I'm just wondering what the Rashiva's...
Well, you certainly are not allowed to cause anyone to speak lashon hara. You're over lifnei iver. But if I'm doing something which is worthwhile and necessary for the tzibur to know, then if someone wants to use that as a springboard for lashon hara, I'm not mechuyev to worry about that. Like we have in the Torah, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, "Naseh odem etzalmenu." He wanted to teach us anova. He wanted to teach there was Messiahs with the Malachim. Naseh odem, let us make man. And the Malach Ashor said that people will now think that there's another power in the world besides the Rebbeinu Shalom. He's saying Naseh odem. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, I have to teach the world that you have to be misiyas with others. Somebody, tzadikim yelchabo, poishim yikoshlubo. The poishim will interpret it wrong. All right, that's not my business. I'm mechuyev to teach the world this idea. So the same thing is, if Agudas Yisrael, another organization, has to post something which is necessary for the tzibur to know, an opinion or information which is good for the tzibur or necessary for the tzibur to know. Somebody wants to use it, the litzoni ador want to use it for lashon hara and for making fun and for ridicule. That's not my business. I don't have to worry about them. That's poishim yikoshlu bom. That's all. Okay.
Thank you, Rashiva. Thank you, Rebbe, for this opportunity to discuss these issues. I asked Mechila if I put the Rashiva Rebbe in a difficult position on some of them, but I think the Olam will definitely be nana from.
Thank you very
this.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
A real thanks, not just a virtual thanks.
And we should mention to thank Agudas Yisrael, which always leads the way in Askanus, in the court cases, in virtually all areas of Askanus. We have to thank Agudas Yisrael for being there. And Bezos Hashem, continue. A lot of the Siyata D'Shmaya comes because Agudas Yisrael has its founders and Shemayim pulling for it.
Absolutely.
You should continue to be a oiski b'tzorach tzibur be'amunah.
Amen. Amen.